Hello and welcome to Good Evening Britain, a Force for Good's weekly show coming to you live from our studios here in the heart of the great British city of Glasgow, with me, your host, Alistair McConnachie. We are broadcasting on all our digital platforms throughout the United Kingdom and across the world. We're bringing you quality pro-UK comment and analysis every Wednesday on Facebook, on YouTube, on X, and also on TikTok. Folks, it's the first show of 2026, and we've even got our Happy New Year banner, which we get to use once a year. And so what better time to use it than tonight, our 165th Good Evening Britain. And as we always say, that's got to be worth something. So folks, please do tell us where you're watching from. Please do send in your comments, send in your greetings, send in your questions, and we'll do our best to answer them in this, the first show of what is going to be an exciting year. 2026, is it going to be the year when we, here in Scotland at least, finally get rid of the SNP from Holyrood, or at least put the SNP and the separatist movement onto a back foot? Because it's only 4 months from today when we will have the Holyrood elections. Today's the 7th of January. In 4 months' time, on the 7th of May, will be the Holyrood election. And it's going to be a critical election in Scotland's history. Will we really be subject to another 5 years of a failed SNP executive? Or will changes and new conversations and new people and new ideas finally hit the political mainstream? That's what we're going to talk about this evening. Before we talk about that, we're also going to just remind you folks that tonight at the bottom of the hour at 7:30 will be the end of our Yo Britannia Christmas crowdfunder, which began 28 days ago. So that's at 7:30. So folks, if you haven't chipped in yet for our Christmas crowdfunder, which gets us through to, takes us through the first few months of the year before our British summertime crowdfunder in June. If you haven't chipped in just to help, whatever you can, £5, a tenner, it's all very good. What are we standing at the moment at crowdfunder.co.uk/AFFG 2026? We are, I'm glad to say, we've hit 25% of our goal. And that's £1,251. We've got another half hour to run. Can we nudge that up a percent or two? Folks, you know what to do. If you can, fire off to crowdfunder.co.uk/AFFG 2026 and chip in something there. Chip in something, and we'll announce the final total at 7:30 when it in fact ends. But you've still got some time. You've still got some time, folks. Hello to all the folk joining us on TikTok. Now, again, let's just fire through some of the rewards that we've got over there at the crowdfunder. We've got the badge, 15 quid donation. We'll send you that badge, which is worth £7. Okay, the wee book for the union, you can get a signed copy of that, which will be valuable sometime in the future, if not actually right now. That's around £15 donation as well, I think. Okay. We've got t-shirts. We've got white t-shirts We've got grey t-shirts. Somebody claimed one of those today, so we've only got 1 or 2 of those left. We've got that fantastic. That's a small-sized Union Jack polo shirt, which is really, really good. Okay. And folks, these have been on the Crowdfunder for a long time. Don't know why, but nobody has yet bit on the Union Jack pound salt and pepper shakers, which would look fantastic on anybody's breakfast table. You cannot gainsay that, can you? Come on. Okay. And of course, we've got our books, One Big Country. You can get a signed copy of that for a donation. And also our other book, Protect Our Country, Policies to Stop Mass Immigration. These books are building the ideological, the intellectual force behind the pro-UK, pro-union cause. And they're a must for any Patriots library. Okay, so all you have to do, folks, with those is simply go to crowdfunder.co.uk/AFFG 2026 and scroll down and you'll see the reward buttons. They're there. And take your opportunity while it is live. Good. Okay, well, I'm not going to say any more about that until 7:30. And let me just communicate a little message here to somebody. Okay, now let's speak about the all-important Holyrood elections that are coming up. Now, many of you might be surprised to know, but the SNP first took power in Scotland under Alex Salmond in May 2007. Okay, by the time the election rolls around this year, that will be 19 years that the SNP has been running the devolved parliament. 19 years. That's to say, if you were born this century in Scotland, you have only ever known the SNP running the country. In cooperation, of course, or in often opposition to the actual British Parliament in London. However, 19 years is an awful long time. And they've been able to do it because there's a significant number of people, obviously, who vote for them. But it is at a sort of level that they're always guaranteed a certain number of votes and a certain number of seats. Although things now have begun to change this year. And it's changed this year because of a growing dissatisfaction with the SNP, with its failed promises, with the fact that the NHS, which is under the control of the SNP, has been struggling, shall we put it that way, with huge waiting lists. Anas Sarwar, the Labour leader, said that there's more people waiting in Scotland on NHS waiting lists than in all of Scotland put together, than in all of England put together, which is, considering the difference in population size, that's an incredible statistic. So they've been failing on that. They've also been failing to stand up for Scotland as far as the mass immigration situation is concerned, because they've been supporting it. So rather than acting as an opposition to Westminster and saying, wait, you need to slow down, you need to stop the boats, you need to get this under control, instead of doing that, which would have actually won them favour with an awful lot of Scottish people, including myself, they have not done that. They have in fact said that Westminster's not letting in enough of them. So they've gone down that whole wrong angle as far as that's concerned. So that's beginning to make a lot of people say, well, there's nothing Scottish. There's nothing historically Scottish about that attitude. And so that's losing them a lot of votes anyway, because there's now an alternative that people can vote for called Reform. So the SNP is going to be struggling. The question is, can we get rid of them, or can we reduce the numbers to such an extent that it will can we reduce the numbers to such an extent that it will make it difficult for them to actually govern, because they'll have to be in forms of coalition, which will cause them problems. Anyway, tell us what you think about those things. We're going to come back to that. Let me just say hello to a few of the people here who have come in. Debbie's first in tonight. She says, good evening, everyone. Hope everyone had a good Christmas and New Year. Absolutely. The Many Faces of Ego says, Happy New Year. And Oksana says, hi and Happy New Year. Catherine says, Happy New Year from Steps. That's Steps, the village, and not Steps, the pop group. Good to see Guerrilla TV in the house. Folks, if you don't already follow Guerrilla TV on Twitter and also on YouTube, please do search for him. And he seems to live outside the Scottish Parliament. Whenever he's got a video, he's down there at the bottom of the Royal Mile, often haranguing MSPs, quite rightly so. A great independent reporter is the chap from Guerrilla TV channel. Please do give him a follow. Paul, hi, Paul. A force for sanity is a force for good. A force for sanity in a mad world, says Paul. Well, thank you. Thank you for that, which we definitely agree with. Hi to Slimian, and a Happy New Year to you too. And to Kathy. Stephen Bailey says, get the SNP out by any means necessary, by which she means vote for a party that can dislodge them in your area. This is going to be harder this time round to know exactly who's the party to vote for, because of course the entrance of Reform changes everything in a Tory, Labour, SNP marginal. The entry of Reform, which is going to take votes from the Tories, the Labour, maybe even some SNP. Who would you vote for? Very difficult to know there. And that, of course, could help the SNP, or it could damage them. We really don't know. Slimian says he's just given Guerrilla TV a follow. Well done. Well done. Good stuff. So when we look at the forthcoming election, John Swinney has said that if he gets 65 seats out of the 129 seats, then that's going to be what he calls a mandate to demand a second separation referendum. And when he says 65 seats, he means 65 seats for the SNP. Now, at the conference at the end of last year, there were quite a few people in the SNP who wanted that 65 number to include all the other independents supporting parties. So if the SNP, together with the Greens and possibly Alba, were to get 65 seats or more, they wanted that to be the mandate. However, John Swinney from his perspective as SNP leader, quite rightly said, no, it's got to be 65 seats for the SNP, not 65 as an amalgamation of all the other parties. And why did he say that? Well, if he had said otherwise, he would be effectively encouraging people to vote for other parties. John Swinney wants you to vote SNP on the constituency and SNP on the regional vote. It's not his job to say, oh yeah, vote for the Greens or vote for Alba or vote for any political opponents or rivals of my party. So of course he said it has to be 65 seats for the SNP. And if we get that, we're then going to start to negotiate the second independence referendum. Now, is that a possibility that they could get 65? Yes, of course it's a possibility, and we should be very much conscious of that. But goodness me, let's hope that he doesn't. However, if he doesn't, if he gets like 61 seats, you can bet he'll change his tune. And what he'll do is he'll go, well, the SNP got 61 votes, but hey, the Greens got 5 and Alba got 1. So that's 67 seats. And so that's a mandate. Okay, so expect his tune to change if he doesn't get 65. But if there is a 65 plus majority, if with all the other parties combined. Anyway, that's politics. That's politics. And that's his goal. That's his goal. And it's our goal to stop him and to stop the other pro-separation parties from getting any kind of majority in the parliament whatsoever. And we're going to do everything that we can at A Force for Good. And that's going to include, if we can get some money coming in tonight on our crowdfunder, scrolling along the bottom there, holding a big rally outside Holyrood as well to remind people of the important issues that are at stake this May, the big important issues. Because think about it, can we really have another 5 years of people like John Swinney demanding open borders, demanding that more and more people come into Glasgow, so-called asylum seekers, having no problem with the levels of homelessness which are being generated by his policy? Can we really survive another 5 years of NHS waiting lists? You know, these are serious matters that are facing Scotland, and Scotland needs root and branch change. Oh my goodness, we need change. And this is the time to do it. Stephen Bailey says 65 seats would equal around 2 million out of 5 million Scots, which is not a mandate. Well, what was the number? It's certainly not a mandate, you're correct, but 2 million seems high. What was the number that, for example, they got last time around in 2021? Was it even as high as 2 million? Certainly, we talk about that in Protect Our Country, a big book for the Union, Volume 1. We examine the mandate question in great depth, and we come to the conclusion that there is only one way that the SNP can have an authoritative mandate. And those of you who want to know can get the book for $9.99. Alan says, the SNP will use every trick in the book to cling to power and keep using the carrot on a stick to convince the gullible. Absolutely. Absolutely. Catherine also notes that some people vote SNP but don't want to break the UK up. And you are right. You are right. There is a type of person, and I've met a few of them, who will vote for the SNP simply because they think it's for Scotland. Because, you know, they're obviously Scottish patriots, and they think, oh, Scottish national party, I'll vote for them, looking out for the best interests of Scotland. But they don't see, when they do that, that all they're doing is they're encouraging the people that they elect to break the union apart. Okay, the SNP, if it stood for the best interests of the Scottish nation within the union, that would be a different matter, and they would get a lot of support for that. But they stand basically to break the union, which is not something that anybody can get behind. Come on, seriously. And as Stephen also points out, in every Holyrood election during the legislative devolution era, which began in 1997, the first elections being 1999, more Scots have voted for pro-UK parties than for separatist ones at these actual events. And that's absolutely so true. Kathy says we will not survive another 5 years of the SNP, and I know exactly what you mean. Will we even survive it? Thank you to Slimyan, who sent a £5 super chat. Thank you very much. He says, chuck that in the hat. We definitely will include that, Slimyan. Thank you. Thank you for your support. Anybody else who wants to chip in via the YouTube program can just click on the little $ below the video, and that takes you to the super chat mechanism. Thank you for that. Let's just leave that up. Let's leave that up for a minute or two. Now, yeah, British Legends is supporting reform. We'll talk about reform in a minute. C says, reform for me, however, anyone bar the SNP would to win. Indeed, indeed. So yeah, John Swinney's offer essentially is, well, more of the same, more of the same. There's nothing new that he's offering other than just demanding another independence referendum. And if that's all you care about, then I suppose some people will vote for that. But that's his main thing. But let's not forget what his other thing is as well, which is basically replacement migration. I mean, John Swinney and the SNP basically want, or at least don't care, if Scots are replaced, so long as it helps the economy in their view. And people say replacement migration is not happening. It's most obviously happening, and the MSPs themselves are advocating for it. Because let me just look at this article which appeared this is back in August, 29th of August in the National. Forbes condemns silence over anti-immigration rhetoric. Here she goes on about an issue of so-called depopulation in the north of Scotland, with people moving down to the other areas of the United Kingdom. And she says some parts of Scotland have seen slower increases, but other parts, particularly the rural coastal areas, are seeing forecasts of double-digit levels of depopulation, and that has implications, particularly when it affects the working age population, for being able to provide public services. Well, that's arguable, but here's her solution. To my mind, it makes the case strongly for stable, humane routes for people to move to Scotland. So what is that? And she's not talking there about people moving from the rest of the UK, which is one matter and which I would not have any objection to. She's talking about stable, humane routes, which means routes essentially for asylum seekers and who will become refugees to move to Scotland. So she's advocating for that. She's openly advocating for what is effectively replacement migration. John Swinney does the same thing. Some of the Labour people do it as well. So, it's a real thing for these people. It's about replacing the population, which in their view is going down. So don't tell me that the SNP doesn't believe in replacement migration. It most certainly does, and it's a key element of its political philosophy. And that's something that we really do need to bring out this year, so that all the Scottish people who vote for the SNP simply because it seems to stand up for Scotland, so that they realise, don't vote for a party that wants to replace you in your own country. We do really need to make that message clear, and we'll make it because we can make it, and Reform and others can take it and moderate it or whatever. But somebody has to say, look, the SNP is trying to replace Scotland, either intentionally or because they're not thinking about it and they don't care one way or the other. But that's what they're trying to do. And as for the Greens, well, they are, of course, even more crazy and even worse. We need 1 million migrants to work the land, says this Green MSP that nobody had ever heard of until she came out with this last year. She's the Green MSP for the Highlands region. Well, hopefully she'll be the last Green MSP up there for a long time with that kind of message. And of course, that again is replacement migration that she wants. Incredible. This year could be our last opportunity to really pull us back from the brink. We cannot allow these utter fruitcakes to be running the country or in any kind of position of power. We have to do whatever we can to keep them out. We really do. We really do, folks. This is the 2 minutes to midnight. The hands that threaten doom. It's upon us. However, let's stay positive. We can do this, folks. We can do this. We can set Scotland up on a new trajectory, a trajectory to hope. So that's the SNP offering, basically. More of the same and replacement migration. The Greens offering is just free stuff for everybody and don't ask us how we're going to pay for it, and also replacement migration. The Labour offering is perhaps more complex. They haven't yet summarised it clearly, but it also involves replacement migration as well, at least until they stand out against it. And we're going to be holding Labour's feet to the fire on this as well. Hitherto, they have not come out against replacement migration in Scotland, but have appeared to support it in everything that they do. And if that is the case, then they do deserve to lose tens of thousands of votes, hundreds of thousands of votes to a party that will stop it. And the only party that is talking about that, of course, is Reform. What's the Tory offering? Well, the Tory offering is growing the economy through presumably tax cuts. And that's the Tory brand, basically. Nothing particularly new about that. To what extent it's going to find traction in the new political reality, who knows? We'll have to see. But like all the other parties, I think the Tories are extremely nervous about this election and could get wiped out. I noticed somebody saying today on the internet that they thought the Tories in Scotland would get wiped out. Who knows? We'll have to wait and see. What's the Lib Dem offer? The Lib Dem offer is basically just vote for us if you don't want to vote for any of the other parties. That's always the Lib Dem offer. And it doesn't really get more complicated than that. But certainly another party that's not to be trusted as far as the immigration issue is concerned, because it is made up of the sorts of people who don't really think through it and will simply advocate more and more and more immigration. and wouldn't be seen to speak against it. So we are then left down with reform, and the reform offer is really to stop immigration. I mean, that's the reason people are voting reform. However, reform will need to have a broad case. And I was reminded of this when I read this article, which appeared in the Daily Telegraph on the 2nd of January. On the 2nd of January. And he points out here, this year will decide if reform can fix Britain. And he points out that many people will actually still vote for their economic interests, and they will put immigration as a secondary issue. And so reform has to have an economically coherent message. And he's absolutely right there. And he is pointing out that they could make a breakthrough in Scotland, they could make a breakthrough in Wales, almost certainly going to make a big impact at the English Council elections, all of which are happening, as I say, 4 months from today, on the 7th of May. But he puts it, reform must do everything possible to ensure that they are in every important political conversation, by which he means they're going to have policies on every single thing that matters. And no doubt, when the time comes, they will, because make no mistake, reform has got money coming out of its ears. I mean, millions of pounds. And they are not, they have the ability to hire whoever they want to think up their policies. They're not going to hire me. I'm too expensive for them, unfortunately, although I could write some good policies for them. In fact, we've written all the policies as far as immigration is concerned for them in Protect Our Country, a big book for the Union, Volume 2, Policies to Stop Mass Immigration. And if all reform did was took this and just copied and pasted the entire thing into its manifesto, then that would be all that it needed. It's all here. It's all here in this book, which you can get simply by going to amazon.co.uk and searching for Protect Our Country. And if any budding reform person wants a copy, contact me. I'll send you a copy as well for a small donation. Good. So reform needs to be in every political conversation that is going, and no doubt it will do. But looking back actually at what I just said there about the millions and millions of pounds that it's got, you do have to wonder, and you do have to question, where's that coming from, and who is giving it to them, and what do these people want? And it could be, and I'm just wargaming here, but there are very rich people who make their money in the bond market, in private equity, in things like that, and they don't deserve to make that kind of money. They're just in the right place at the right time, and they know how to play that game, and they've got the correct connections, and so they can make hundreds of thousands and millions of pounds, and in some cases billions of pounds, and they want to keep making it. And these people, what should we call them? The financiers, the bond market traders, the private equity owners. Collectively, they're called the market. But realistically, we should always imagine them as real people who all generally kind of know each other. They're all in the same social circles, and they're all doing very well for themselves, thank you very much, regardless of how you and I are doing. And However, the economy does, they're also going to continue to do quite well for themselves, relatively speaking. And collectively, we call them the markets. And I was reminded of this when I was reading this article, big long article, which appeared in the Saturday Telegraph, the 27th of December. Ed Miliband as PM with Zach Polanski as his deputy is not as crazy as you think. And what this article did, which is getting filed in our detailed files, is it looked at the various possibilities for 2029 and what was likely and what was unlikely. But the things that stood out to me was he emphasized James Frayne, he emphasized, the journalist here, he emphasized the relevance of the markets. And he says, see, this isn't GB News. I don't have a teleprompter here. I've got to do all of this. But believe me, it's all valuable. It's all valuable. Yeah, he goes, the public finances of the United Kingdom are in a dire state, and with much of our national debt held offshore, skeptical outsiders meaning rich people from abroad, have the power to inflict serious trauma on our economy. In short, if the markets don't like our economic policy, the economic policy of the democratically elected government, the markets can force a change. Given that both the Tories and Labour have allowed public spending to rocket, particularly on welfare, it's perfectly possible to imagine the markets will demand a serious course correction. And okay, so I'm just meant to sit there and go, well, then in that case, the markets are right to inflict serious trauma on our economy. The markets are right to decide that they don't like the democratically elected government's policy. So let's all go to these skeptical outsiders, people who probably live abroad, or whether they live in the city of London or wherever, it doesn't really matter. And they're going to inflict serious trauma on our economy and force a correction, whatever a correction is meant to mean. So it's high time that these so-called bond markets and these sorts of people were revealed as who are these people and what gives them the ability to inflict trauma on our economy if they don't like the government. And we're seeing that to an extent play out worldwide as well. I mean, I don't want to get into the rights and wrongs of what's happening in Venezuela, but clearly very rich people never liked Maduro and have always wanted him gone, and they've got enough power to sanction him and others. I'm just using him as an example in order to get their way. Well, that's not acceptable in a democracy. We have to look into how all of that happens. There's another one. Should Britain get out of the OBR? Saturday, the 3rd of January. Daily Telegraph again. And he's talking about whether or not the Office of Budget Responsibility should be scrapped. And he says the government could simply junk the OBR and bring all forecasting and analysis back within the Treasury, whereupon the Chancellor would still be subject to, quote, the discipline of the markets. Again, if the markets didn't like what the Chancellor was doing, the democratically elected Chancellor, doesn't matter whether the Tory, Labour or Reform, if the markets didn't like that, then they're going to exert discipline upon this Chancellor. And you see, this is where I wonder if Reform really has the radical ability to recognise that and to do what needs to be done and to protect the rest of us from malign influence of these market these market people? You know, do they have the ability to protect the country from that sort of predatory capitalism? So that's something that I don't think that they have. I think that they're getting money from these people, and that when push comes to shove, they will not reveal these people, but rather go along with what the markets or the skeptical outsiders want. And that's not really good enough in a democracy. But at least there'll be other people here to try to do our best to point out to them what's wrong. Now let's have a wee look to see our crowdfunder has ended. And what are we at? Well, we're still at what we came in at, which is £1,251. So that's good because we hit our 25% target. And in fact, because of a couple of donations on PayPal as well, we can take that up to 1,600. 1,600. And that's good. That's good. I just want to say thank you, folks. Thank you very much for everybody who gave. There were how many people gave? Some people gave more than once, it should be said, and to them we are extremely grateful. 27 people gave, with everything from a fiver up to 100, and the total pledges were 33. So that meant several people have given twice, and I want to thank everybody for that, and especially want to thank the people who gave more than once. But you're all stars, and I've been reliably informed that 1,600 is 32% of our goal. Our goal was 5,000. So basically we've pulled in a third of our goal. And that's really, really good. Really, really good. And that will help us get through the first few months, should take us up to the Scottish parliamentary elections. We will, however, have to have a British summertime crowdfunder because, as you can imagine, we can't get through the whole year on that. But we'll certainly do our best to be very frugal. And for all of those of you who have been following us for many years, you know we're exceptionally good value for money. Talking of which, changing the subject, I was catching up on reading the National today. It's always difficult to read the National. You've got to set aside a few hours, take a very deep breath, and but they do have some good stuff, and they do have some interesting information. And I do actually agree with some of what they say, not the separation bit though. Anyway, here's just a general report. £240,000 grant to aid cities' work to mark history of colonialism. And what this is saying is that we, the British taxpayer, Edinburgh Council has been awarded almost 240,000 by, well, it's the National Lottery, to progress work on commemorating the city's history of colonialism. And so some of you might think, £250,000 to commemorate how great Britain was during the colonial era. £250,000 to esteem the men and women of the age of achievement. £250,000 to say and create educational programs which inspire the youth about the great things that our ancestors did. Well, I would like to think that. But somehow my heart sinks when I read that that's probably not going to be the case. According to the Edinburgh Slavery and Colonialism Legacy Review, it made several recommendations, including a touring exhibition on diversity, coordinating a digital campaign around heritage body UNESCO's Day for the Remembrance of the Slave Trade, and hosting a Decolonizing Edinburgh conference. And all of that with £250,000, I'm afraid you're going to have considerable amounts of money left over, because I could do that. A Force for Good could do that on maybe 500 quid. All right. However, the public sector in Edinburgh is never one to miss a gravy train, especially when it's literally dumping the gravy all over them. To this event, Edinburgh Council has provided £10,000 and the lottery provided the rest. Labour Council leader Jane Meagher said that in order to become a, quote, inclusive city, Edinburgh, quote, must continue to confront the uncomfortable parts of our past. Oh no. So it's not to promote our past. It's not to celebrate and educate and learn from our past. It's to confront. These Labour people, they always want to confront things. Why do you have to confront things? Why can't you just like sensibly discuss something? Why do you always have to confront it? It's so hostile. So hostile. Anyway, the chair of the Edinburgh Council, Edinburgh Slavery and Colonialism Legacy Review Implementation Group, Irene Masota, said the legacy of colonialism, quote, continues to shape inequalities. Is that so? This funding will enable us to work with communities and institutions across the city in open and honest reflection and dialogue. Not to reopen old wounds, but to help us understand our shared responsibility and how we move forward together with compassion, equality, and justice. Well, perhaps within that theme, you can hear about the good things as well. That's what I always like to think. You know, these types of people, if they come up with their schemes, you know, okay, we can maybe join it and have a good thing to say about the empire and see how that goes down. You know, maybe we can use it to educate and understand the bigger picture. That's what I like to think anyway. That's what I like to think. Maybe we should apply to the National Lottery to commemorate Glasgow's history of colonialism, and to do it in the way that I suggest. And to be serious, I don't think I have the time to do that, but maybe somebody could do that, right? If the National Lottery is basically giving out money, hand over fist, to commemorate colonialism, to commemorate, quote, the city's history of colonialism, then what's to stop a group setting up a pro-British Empire theme, which could include touring exhibitions on Britain's greatness, a digital campaign about how Britain abolished the slave trade. I mean, seriously, serious point, you know? Why can't we do that? And I'll tell you why we can't do it. It's because people like me my type of person, people like the people watching this, we tend not to be bothered with politics like that. That kind of politics is for a certain type of person. You know, the rest of us are too busy keeping our nose clean. The rest of us are too busy going to work. The rest of us are too busy trying to keep a roof over our head without having to bother about the legacy of colonialism. But if you're the kind of person that does bother about the legacy of colonialism from a certain point of view, then money is a wash for you. It's everywhere. I wish I was, in a way, sometimes I wish I was that kind of person, because I would be living high on the hog. I really would, talking about how terrible Britain was. Easy money, easy money. Anyway, we do what we can do, and we focus, as Jack says, on the good things, as Alan Jack says, on the good things. Absolutely. Catherine thinks we should maybe go for it. Alan says, commemorate equals remember now. If the history is less than favourable, you still need to remember it to prevent making the same mistakes again. That's certainly true. That is certainly true. Stephen says, what about the parts Scots played in the Empire? And he adds, in many ways, the British Empire was a force for good. Absolutely. Absolutely. It had a moral theme about it. I was just looking at a Wikipedia page the other day on a book called Imperialism by J.A. Hobson, which came out in 1902. And in it, he talked about how, or his theory anyway, was that imperialism was just very much was driven by economics. And he's talking about British imperialism. And of course, to an extent, he had a very good point. But Lenin took that book and developed it further, emphasizing the economic elements of imperialism. But in reaction to that, other people said, well, there may have been that, as there certainly was, like the Boer War, for example, which was just very much a kind of economically driven war. But there was also the other side, the more benign side, the explorers, the educators, the missionaries, the engineers, the people who in their minds were bringing enlightenment to the benighted world. So imperialism is very much a mixed bag, but it is very often driven by economics, and certainly the left are right when they talk about that, but not so right when they talk about how it was generally always a bad thing. It certainly wasn't at all. See, I've already done more for education than this lot is ever going to do. That's an interesting point. Alan says that people like Alan and others paid taxation to clear the original debt, which was incurred ending the slave trade. That's correct, because I don't quite know, maybe you'll know, Alan, but Alan actually goes on and tells us the answer to that exact question. The slave trade debt was only finally cleared in 2015. It's amazing when you think about that. And to whom are we paying this debt? Probably the people who are now still running the markets, so-called, in the city of London. Yes, as Oksana says, the British Empire provided many countries with their infrastructure and wealth. And we helped police the world to a certain extent. Well, now we've got another country policing the world, which we'll all have our own opinions on, no doubt, especially if you live in Greenland. Yeah. British legend says we need a unionist rally with all flags flying. Well, God willing, we will have one organised by a Force for Good later this year. Watch this page for that. It will certainly be before the Scottish election, which is only 4 months away on this day, 7th of May. Swinney brands reform leader as complete joke. I meant to mention this earlier in the programme. Swinney is saying that, he's talking about Nigel Farage, obviously. He says he has nothing positive to offer. And this is the bit that I don't understand. And with the fresh start of independence, we can be rid of his brand of politics for good. Well, how do you figure that? I mean, are you going to get rid of all the people in Scotland who believe in those things, right? Reform could take up to who knows, a quarter of the vote, potentially, this May. Okay? Independence is not going to get rid of those people, is it? It's not going to get rid of those politics. So John Swinney should be careful what he wishes for, because even in your so-called independent Scotland, you're going to have a large number of Scots, and in fact, an increasing number of Scots who certainly don't agree with John Swinney's globalism and open borders. And so, no, John, independence isn't going to solve that particular problem for you at all. And it's absurd to imagine that somehow you change to a separated state and everybody's going to agree with you. I mean, that's just ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. Arrogant Reeves says, no indie ref, even if SNP win Holyrood majority. This is going back a bit. This is back in November the 28th. And what she said there was quite right. And again, I should have mentioned this earlier. But she said, oh, we've had our referendum and it's once in a generation. And of course, she was pulled up on that quite rightly, because how long is a generation? And a generation will pass. What she should have said, and what we're going to be promoting this year, is that the breakup of the United Kingdom is a matter for the United Kingdom Parliament, the Parliament of that particular nation. So a majority at devolved election does not give anybody a mandate, because that mandate must be expressed, for starters, at a British parliamentary election, because it's the British parliamentary gathering of folk on the green benches from all around Scotland, England, Northern Ireland and Wales, which represents all the people of that kingdom. And all of these people, whether Scottish, English, Northern Irish or Welsh, have a vested interest in the United Kingdom, whether to keep it together or to break it apart, but they're all represented on the green benches at Westminster. So it's an election to that parliament, which can theoretically provide a mandate for an independence referendum. And we looked at that and we explained it all in One Big Country, a big book for the union. And we went through 16, I think it was, different types of quote unquote mandate. And we came up with the only one that's actually genuine and which would actually work. And it's all in there, folks. So if you're a Scottish nationalist, buy that book as well. It will educate you. It'll educate you into how politics actually works in a unitary state such as the United Kingdom. And folks, that seems to be the best place to end the show. Derek says it's a great read. Thank you very much. That's the place that we're going to end the show. And we'll be back next week and we'll have a guest next week. And it just remains for me to say thank you very much, everybody who contributed to the crowdfunder. That's going to help. That's going to keep us going for the next 2 or 3 months at least. And we're grateful to everybody who's done that. And what's that? This British Legend says, thank you, Alistair. I will be there for the Unionist rally when it's held. Well, we'll definitely keep everybody in the picture on that. So until next week, folks, let me just say, God bless the United Kingdom and God save the King. See you next week.